Hi guys, my name is Justin Fields. I wanted to share with you the details of my Forrest Fenn treasure solve. Last year, 2019, two friends and I went looking in Kirwin, Wyoming. I know Kirwin is a popular spot for a number of reasons, lots of words that line up with the poem. People have been going out there since the very beginning of the search, but all of these things played into our solve. We knew early on, Forrest had confirmed that searchers had been within a couple hundred feet, so there was no reason to think that Kirwin was out of the question, simply because there are a lot of places to look out there. So first wanted to say big congratulations to the finder of the treasure chest. He's done something that thousands of people have endeavored to do over the past several years, so congratulations to him, and I hope to hear his story and solution when he's ready to share that. Also wanted to say a huge thank you to Forrest Fenn for initiating this whole search and bringing together people from around the world, really, to share their creative ideas, and honestly wouldn't have got as far as I did, as quick as I did, without the online community who've been very vocal in sharing their opinions and thoughts, and just a lot of creative people and creative solutions out there. So thank you to Forrest for initiating the search. So real quick, I know there are a lot of solves out there, a lot of people posting their solutions now that the chest has been discovered, so I'll try and post timestamps in the description of the video here so that you can jump ahead. Just to really quickly recap for people who are not familiar with the chase, Forrest Fenn, he is a art collector, art dealer, retired, lives in New Mexico, who in 2010 published a book called The Thrill of the Chase that included a poem with 9 clues, according to Forrest, that if followed precisely would lead to a treasure chest that he had hidden in the Rocky Mountains, somewhere around 2009 or 2010 when he was 79 or 80 years old. The poem has 24 lines, and there's no confirmation as to what the 9 clues might be, other than Forrest confirming that the line "begin it where warm waters halt" is where you should start. So the assumption being that that's the first clue. Doesn't mean that the other lines and stanzas in the poem are not important. Just not necessarily one of the 9 necessary clues. In a book following the original Thrill of the Chase, Forrest published a map that narrowed the search area down to the section of New Mexico north of Santa Fe, all the way up to the Canadian border at the northern end of Montana. So we have the top part of New Mexico, all of Colorado, all of Wyoming, all of Montana, somewhere in the Rocky Mountain region of those states. The poem itself is somewhat cryptic, but at the same time very simple and straightforward. And if you've spent any amount of time on the blogs or the fan pages or watching YouTube videos of people's solves, you'll see just how many clues line up with regions in all 4 states. Forrest also indicated in his book, The Thrill of the Chase, that there were additional hints sprinkled throughout the stories in his book, which is a memoir collection of personal stories from his past, and that these clues or these hints would help you decipher the clues in the poem, but they on their own would not help you find the treasure. So essentially what you want to do is, or what the goal was to figure out what you thought the 9 clues in the poem were, and then reread the book looking for hints in the text of his book that might help you either clarify or come up with solutions to the clues in the poem. So I'll at the latter part of this video include some of my thoughts as to what those hints in the book were, for our solution at least. In addition to the poem, the 9 clues in the poem and the clues in the book, or the hints in the book, Forrest has been very active and vocal on the blogs and in answering questions for various people on their sites. He's also issued some warnings for people to keep safe, and in doing so, he has included a handful of other clues that have helped narrow down the search area. For instance, he indicated that the treasure is above 5,000 feet above sea level, below 10,200 feet. It's not underwater, but he said that he knew it was wet. And a handful of other clues and hints that would just help you narrow your path and help you stay safe in your search. Because as we know, unfortunately, there have been a handful of people who were lost or perished while searching for Forrest Fenn's treasure. Forrest had said on a number of occasions that he was 79 or 80 years old when he hid the treasure, and that he had to carry this heavy load in his backpack, making 2 trips from his car to the spot in order to do so at that age. So, using just logic, don't do something that a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't do, carrying a backpack full of 25 pounds of treasure. So going back to our solve in Kirwin, I first came across the treasure hunt in December of 2018, and after just diving headfirst into the blogs and research several hours a day for several months straight, decided on Kirwin because I came up with what I thought were 9 clues and 1 clue that I thought maybe some people had missed. Putting that together with the fact that Forrest had said some searchers were within a couple hundred feet, I thought it was at least worth going out to Kirwin, Wyoming to check out our solution. Kirwin, for those who don't know, is a ghost town in the Rocky Mountain region of Wyoming. It's fairly secluded. It's about 35 miles from the nearest town, which is Meeteetse. And Meeteetse itself is a very small town, which is, again, probably, 15 miles maybe south of Cody, Wyoming. So it's in the mountain region. It's a rugged road to get there. It's very rocky, and it's like a logging road that leads out there. It's like 12 miles, and it takes 2.5 hours basically to get there because you have to drive so slow over all these large rocks. The town was a mining town for precious metals at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. There was I think about 200 people living there at the height of the town, and there was an avalanche in 1907 that destroyed a lot of the town, or some of the town, and killed 3 of the residents there. And apparently that spring, everybody packed up and left. And so the land was purchased by private owners over the decades that followed. And there were attempts made to kind of reopen the mines there looking for metal, but because of the cost and the labor involved in pulling metal out of the ground from that area and then dragging it all the way back out of the mountain region, they closed up shop and never really made a go of it again. So the land was purchased in 1992, I believe, by the Richard King Mellon Foundation and donated back to the public. And from that point on, it was managed by the Park Service, or the National Forest Service, I should say. And so it's part of the Shoshone National Forest now. And beginning in 1999, volunteers and I think maybe the local museum initiated a kind of not refurbishment of the town, but a stabilization of the buildings that were still there. So they went out, for a week or two every summer and kind of took their tools and try and reinforce the old mine buildings that were still standing, not to bring them up to code in any way, but just to keep them from falling apart any further. So there's still remnants of several mine buildings there, cabins and general store, mine shafts. There's a lot of heavy machinery and split rocks and things laying around. And the other thing that puts Kirwin on the map for a lot of people is that Amelia Earhart visited there in the mid-1930s and fell in love with it so much that she asked the then owner of the land, Carl Dunrud, to build her a cabin there. And he was doing that, building a cabin for Amelia Earhart when she went missing. And it was only a few logs high, and you can still see the remnants of that cabin there. Just a few rotting logs where her cabin was being built. But it's a very interesting spot just to know that Amelia Earhart had visited there and loved it so much that she wanted to have a summer home there. Was pretty cool. The reason that Kirwin appeals to a lot of people is because it has some place names that right off the bat line up with the poem and make it somewhat intriguing. There's the Wood River, which is essentially the Wood River Canyon that you travel into to get to Kirwin. And there's a line in the poem, "In the wood, if you're brave and in the wood." So a lot of people associate the Wood River with that line from the poem. There is Brown Mountain and Brown Basin. And one of the key clues in Forrest's poem is "put in below the home of Brown." So with the Brown using a capital B. So a lot of people thought that might be a place name. So Brown Mountain lines up nicely with that. There's a clue, "no place for the meek." And there's a ghost town, obviously, the Kirwin ghost town, where people felt that could be no place for the meek. The term brave lines up potentially with Chief Mountain, if you consider chief to be like an Indian chief, and brave was a term that was associated with Native Americans. Also, Amelia Earhart herself, she was a pilot. Forrest Fenn was a pilot. I guess in some contexts, Amelia Earhart was known to be meek and wear a brown jacket, so maybe her cabin is the home of Brown, or maybe her cabin is no place for the meek. So several different things that just right off the bat draw people to Kirwin. So a couple of these points were in my mind when I started researching Kirwin, and then there were a couple others that really helped me narrow this down to 9 clues and led me to go on a trip to Kirwin, Wyoming with a couple of friends looking for this treasure. So let's start with what I think is the first, or what Forrest has said is the first clue. We'll start with "begin it where warm waters halt." Many people have many solutions to this, and Forrest has clearly stated on a number of occasions, if you don't know where warm waters halt, then you don't have anything. There's just too many different places to look in the Rocky Mountains, too many places that line up to some level with the clues in the poem. And if you can't figure out where warm waters halt, then you just you might as well stay home, he said in so many words. So of course there are hot springs all over the Rocky Mountains. We have Yellowstone, geysers, natural springs, rivers with names that suggest hell or heat or boiling. Any number of solutions to this. For us, I initially started looking at the Sunshine Reservoirs. There are 2 Sunshine Reservoirs right at the mouth of the canyon that you would travel into to get to Kirwin. I later decided that the more important and more concrete solution to begin it where warm waters halt is the county line between Hot Springs County and Park County, Wyoming. For this reason, Forrest has said there are thousands of places in the Rockies where warm waters halt. You have to look at the big picture. So in my mind, look at the big picture is look at a larger map, and county lines are on larger maps. There is also a clue in the book, which I will discuss later, that helps solidify this clue in my mind. So we have what I feel is somewhat of a one-of-a-kind solution to begin at where warm waters halt. It's the county line between Hot Springs, which are warm waters, and Park County, which Park in the sense of, obviously Park County is meant to cover national parks in that sense, but park meaning to stop in the sense of park your car or park your bottom in a seat, that type of thing. So where Hot Springs Park is where warm waters halt. When you look at the map, Hot Springs and Park County is just somewhat of a little stairway, jagged, line between these two counties, and it's a very small line when you look at the available Rocky Mountain solutions here. And there's only one small part of that line that is in any type of mountainous region, and that's on the westernmost corner or edge of the line, where Hot Springs and Park County lines cross into the Shoshone National Forest. The next clue then, take it in the canyon down. Down is meant in the sense in our solution elevation. This line crosses into high mountain regions, and to travel down from those mountains into the canyon, and there's really only one canyon nearby, and that's the Wood River Canyon, is meant in that sense. So to take it in the canyon down is to look from that line down elevation into a canyon nearby, and again, the only canyon nearby is Wood River Canyon. The next line in the poem is not far, but too far to walk. In our interpretation, that is meant to indicate that you can't actually walk from, or not easily, you can't walk easily from the height of the Park County, Hot Springs County line in the mountains into Kirwin. It just doesn't make any practical sense for you to walk out to that point and then travel down into the canyon. So, and it is only a few miles from the line to Kirwin itself. So it is, in my opinion, an indication that not far but too far to walk, that you're looking from this line to the point in Kirwin. But in my mind, it's not a required hint, because the next line of the poem is put in below the home of Brown. And in our interpretation, home of Brown is Brown Basin. Forrest was an Air Force pilot. He refers to home base, or a couple instances of home base in his Thrill of the Chase book. To us, that was a hint. We're not looking for a weird definition of brown. I know many people have explored lots of alternate definitions of brown, whether that be brown trout. We're looking for waters where brown trout reside, a bear's den, a foxhole, a beaver dam, something fawn colored like Forrest's cow Bessie, Amelia Earhart's jacket, lots of different things. In our interpretation, Brown was capitalized, and that meant it was a place name. So for us, we were looking for, and there are a handful of brown features in the Rocky Mountains. You have Brown Mountain, Brown Peak, Brown Gulch, probably a dozen different places you could look at, or more. So for us, the important word was home. Home meant base, because he was an Air Force pilot, and he references home base in one of the more important chapters of his book. So for us, we were looking for home of Brown. Put in below the home of Brown meant put in below the base of Brown. In and base to us, roll it together, you get base in. Brown, base, in. Whether that's right, I don't know. We don't have the chest. But this is what we worked with. Brown Basin, put in below the home of Brown. Put in being a boating or rafting term, that's where you enter the water. So the clue is kind of double meaning. You're putting in below the home of Brown, meaning you're entering the Wood River, which flows from west to east, just south of Brown Basin. So you put in there. The next clue then for us is from there, it's no place for the meek. One definition of meek is spiritless or lacking spirit. So for us, that meant enter the ghost town. Ghost town is if you have no spirit, don't go to a ghost town. So like I said, the buildings in Kirwin were reinforced in the late 90s, so there are a lot of buildings still standing there. So I think that's a valid clue. Forrest would reasonably expect that the Kirwin ghost town buildings would still be standing, or at least remnants of them would still be standing for several, potentially more decades. So we have no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh to us was not a clue. I know a lot of people looked at nigh as meaning on the left-hand side, and that meant that they should be looking left or going left. For us, that did not play a part in our solve. So the next clue for us was there will be no paddle up your creek. The nearest creek to the Kirwin ghost town is called Cascade Creek. It flows from south to north into the Wood River and enters the Wood River just west of the ghost town. So for us, no paddle up your creek meant stay down creek. We explored a little bit farther up creek, and the Cascade Creek kind of splits into two, and so crossing over that and exploring that area was a little bit more difficult. The farther you get down creek towards the Wood River, it's easier to cross there. So no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. Heavy loads taken straight would mean a bunch of rocks that had been deposited by running water. And water high, in our opinion, was confirmation Cascade Creek was the correct creek, because Cascade is essentially, several waterfalls in succession, and there are definitely several cascades and waterfalls on Cascade Creek. The next clue then, if you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down, your quest to cease. Many people I know think that that's the last clue, and reasonably so. You've found a blaze, you look down, you find the treasure chest. Where we explored near Cascade Creek and Wood River, we did not find any significant blazes. There are trees everywhere, rocks everywhere. Not something that we felt stood out in any particular way. So we crossed over Cascade Creek and continued to explore on a mountain that we had not seen mentioned in anybody else's solutions. And this is what we thought was the ninth clue. And the reason we went to Kirwin was because there's a line in the last stanza that says, "Hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold." Now, when we first started exploring the treasure hunt, looking at people's videos, reading up on solutions, we were watching people explore in Rocky Mountain regions where they were wearing shirts and shorts, and they looked hot, sweaty, and they were drinking water, and it was immediately jumped out at us that worth the cold may not mean exactly what it said. I know a lot of people feel it just means that you're out in high elevation, even though Forrest said don't search, only search in the summer months when there's no snow on the ground. People felt that, it meant that you have to walk through water that's very cold. But for us, we figured there were probably ways to avoid that. You could wear high boots or waders or something and not feel the cold. So the line, "Hear me all and listen good, your effort will be worth the cold," to us stood out as something important. And when we found a good map of Kirwin, and Forrest has said all you need to find the poem is a good map and the poem, a good map of Kirwin lists the name of the mountain right across Cascade Creek from the ghost town, and that mountain is called Mount Sniffel. It's spelled Sniffel, so not spelled sniffle like you would expect, like a cold. But given that the line in the poem is "hear me all and listen good," to us that implied that the sound of the word was more important than the spelling. And we know that Forrest likes to get creative with his spelling, and he has suggested that maybe a kid might be best suited to solve his poem, because maybe there's some creative definitions or interpretations that only a kid would think of. So for us, this was that creative clue. Mount Sniffel, when said aloud, sounds like you have a cold. So when he says worth the cold, to us that meant let's cross Cascade Creek and get on to Mount Sniffel and start searching there. So that's exactly what we did. Forrest had also said that people had been within 200 feet of the treasure, and we knew for a fact that people had initiated their searches at the Kirwin, or they had parked their car at the parking area just north of the ghost town, and instead of crossing into the ghost town, they had continued west following a walking path that took them to the Amelia Earhart cabin. So for those people who were searching in the Amelia Earhart cabin and had posted their solutions early, Forrest was aware that that's where they had gone. So for us, we thought, well, guess what's 200 feet away from that path? Mount Sniffel. It's just on the other side of the Wood River. So when we got there, unfortunately, to our surprise, after looking at Google Maps and studying photos of the area for several months, the Forest Service in, I think, 2017 had gone in and cut down a huge swath of trees due to a bark beetle infestation. So there was a huge man-made path, essentially, of cut down trees that went from the ghost town across Cascade Creek and onto Mount Sniffel for several hundred yards. And it was very wide. And so where we thought we would just be searching among trees, when we arrived at Kirwin and made it onto Mount Sniffel, it was a huge, almost kind of like a wasteland. There were still trees standing closer to the coast of Mount Sniffel, where it overlooks down onto the Wood River. But it was a huge open area, dead trees laying everywhere, tree stumps laying everywhere, twigs, new trees that had been planted with, blue tags on them. So it was an area that we expected would have been perfect in terms of Forrest's description, saying that it was not a place people go, and it was not in close proximity to a man-made path. And when we got there, we thought, oh, geez, clearly people have been here in the last 2 years. Maybe it's possible somebody stumbled on this thing. So that being said, we continued to looking for a blaze. And when we got to the point on Mount Sniffel where we were just across from the Tumlum Mine building, the Tumlum Mine is one of the more iconic mine buildings in Kirwin. It's really cool. You can go into it. It's on the way to the Amelia Earhart cabin. So if we had stayed on the north side of the Wood River, not crossed into the ghost town, just stayed on the north side of the wood and continued west on the walking path, Tumlum Mine is one of the first things you run into, and you definitely want to stop and take some photos and look over the edge and look at the waterfall below and go into the building. There's a big boiler inside. Just a real cool piece of history. And from Forrest's comments, that people had not only passed within 200 feet, but stopped within 200 feet. And in one interview, he even said that people had sent him photographs and he recognized the location and knew they were within a couple hundred feet. To us, we knew there were only a couple of places at most between the parking lot and the Amelia Earhart cabin where you would stop and take photos. And this is definitely one of them. The Tumlum Mine is definitely one of them. So you wouldn't just stop in the middle of a path somewhere and take a picture of a tree and have Forrest recognize that. That seems like probably not particularly likely. But the fact that this iconic building was the first stop, and we know that Forrest did not walk a ton. He said he walked less than a few miles. And remember, he was almost 80. and he was carrying a heavy chest. He had to do it twice. He walked from his car to the spot, dropped off the chest or the treasure, went back to his car, picked up the other half, either the chest or the treasure, walked back to the spot, put the whole thing there, and then went back to his car, all in a single afternoon. So this spot where we were on Mount Sniffel was a reasonable walk, and the only difficult part would have been crossing Cascade Creek. But if, Forrest being an outdoors man, he probably had, walking stick. It wasn't that difficult to cross. So it's very likely that he could have crossed over Cascade Creek onto Mount Sniffel prior to this Forest Service work being done, walked through the trees, happened upon this spot right across from the Tumlum mine. This is our thinking. And of course, when we got to the Tumlum mine, or across from the Tumlum mine on Mount Sniffel, the thing that you see that you really can't see from being at the mine building is this mine material that had spewed from the mine building down the side of the canyon wall into the Wood River, had left these brilliant yellow stripes that you can even see from Google Maps. On Google Maps, they look like just short little yellow spots. But when you're standing on Mount Sniffel, looking across the Wood River Canyon to the Tumlum mine, you can see these giant yellow streaks. There's two of them, one coming directly from the building, and then one a few feet to the east of that's not connected to a building. And to us, we were thinking these things have got to be the blaze. So we spent a great deal of time looking in that area, and didn't find the chest. We were planning to go back again this year, 2020, to look again, because I feel in our initial excitement, maybe we didn't look as closely as we should have at the canyon area across from that second yellow streak coming from the rocks to the east of the Tumlum mine. We spent a great deal in the mine area, and this one off to the side, I feel maybe looking back, we could have spent more time looking there. So maybe that's where this thing was. Hopefully we'll find out soon. But that's it. That's what we thought people were missing. We thought the worth the cold was the word that was key. Cold was the word that was key. Now, Forrest his initial indication that there was a word that was key has kind of been convoluted into there was a key word in the poem. And a lot of people took that to mean that the poem is some kind of cipher and that you have to choose a word and somehow unlocks these clues like National Treasure style or something, or you rearrange the whole poem. I think the word that is key, it was best described in one of Forrest's most recent interviews. Maybe it was the last interview he did before the chest was discovered, where he said, I think it was Doug Preston asked, is there still a word that is key in the poem? And Forrest said, there's a word in there that will help you some more than others, but you have to have all the clues. So in my opinion, if you had all these clues leading you to Kirwin, and you were like, okay, we're here at Cascade Creek, we've gone through the place that is Meek, we've put in below the home of Brown, and here we are at the Cascade Creek Wood River Junction, what next? Now the word that is key, cold, comes into play. We have to be on Mount Sniffel right across. So that was our thinking, that this is the one thing that people were missing, and it made sense with the fact that people had been searching, people had gone to Kirwin, people had looked in Amelia Earhart area. People had obviously gone into the ghost town, even if they didn't have any other clues to go on. I'm sure they went into the ghost town just to see the ghost town. And Forrest had said at some point, he's like, I know people figured out the first two clues and we're a couple 100 feet away. It's possible people figured out the third and fourth clue. I think in that that comment to us meant, well, people have gone to the ghost town, but he doesn't know if they figured out the clues to get there. They just went to the ghost town because they had made the trip to Kirwin. So that's where we got. So going back to the hints in the book, in the first chapter, which I believe is called Important Literature, Forrest is recounting a story in kind of J.D. Salinger type lingo about how he purchased some classic literature at a Borders bookstore, which kind of seems a little bit out of character considering Forrest's book was only available in one tiny independent Santa Fe bookstore. For him to be shopping at Borders just kind of seems funny. So I think that's part of the clue. There's a line where he's talking about waiting in line behind two borderline biddies, old ladies who are, chatting away about something. So that stood out to me because he's in line at Borders behind borderline biddies. Could just be a coincidence, but the fact that they are biddies and not some other term stands out because a couple chapters later, there's a story about two biddies that Forrest encountered at a church social when he was young, and the title of the chapter is "No Place for Biddies," and "No Place for the Meek" is a line in the poem and a clue in the poem. So to make that connection seems like, okay, "No Place for Biddies" is titled that way so that you pay attention. It's not necessarily a clue in and of itself, but pay attention to it because it's associated with the poem line. And now we have this use of the word biddies in the first chapter where he's talking about borderline in the Borders line. So to us, that worked as a hint. Okay, we know a borderline is important somehow. That for us was confirmation of where warm waters halt. It's the border line between Hot Springs County and Park County. Going back to page 91, My War for Me, Forrest refers to his home base 2 times in that chapter in the exact same phraseology. So to us that stood out, home base. When we're talking about home of Brown, we're talking about base. So that is what helped us decipher Brown Base Inn. So Forrest also said, in addition to the hints, there are a couple of aberrations that are kind of on the outside. And for us, one of those was the bells that Forrest had fashioned and written sayings on them. One of his favorite sayings, I guess, is imagination is more important than knowledge, which I believe he attributes to Albert Einstein. And when he printed that phrase on one of his bells, he intentionally misspelled the word knowledge, obviously, to be funny. So there, on the way to Kirwin, there's a little, I don't even think it's a town, I think it's referred to as a hamlet. Right outside the canyon, before you enter into the Wood River Canyon, is a town called Dumbbell. And for us, if you misspell knowledge on a bell, is that a dumbbell? I don't know. It's kind of stretch, but maybe it's an aberration, maybe it's confirmation. The funny thing about it is the town of Dumbbell is only spelled with one B. Dumbbell. It's misspelled. So knowledge, dumbbell, both misspelled. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't have the chest. I'm just, I'm human. So the other important quotes that Forrest had shared that were not in the book, were not clues in the poem or hints in the book. The most important for us was somebody had asked whether Forrest followed his own clues when he went to hide the chest, or if he took a different shortcut because he's familiar with the area. And Forrest's response was, clues should be followed in order. There is no other way to my knowledge. And of course he misspelled knowledge. But the answer, there's no other way to my knowledge, indicated that we're looking for a canyon or an area where there's only one way in and one way out, and it's the same way. So that to us narrowed down the search more than anything, more than the elevation clue 5,000 to 10,200, more than, we're looking for pine trees, or, almost more than the Warm Waters Hull, because there are very few areas where you're going to find clues that line up with the clues in the poem, and there's only one direction in. I know a lot of people are looking in Yellowstone or West Yellowstone, places where Forrest grew up, or where his stories take place, Earthquake Lake, all these places. But every single one of those locations, you can enter and exit from multiple directions. So if there's only one way, we're looking for a much smaller area in those locations. And for us, Kirwin fit that perfectly. You could only go in that one canyon road, and there was only one way out unless you were going to hike out. And I don't think anybody expects that was the case. I mean, listen, you can get into any place if you jump out of an airplane, but that's not what we're talking about here. This poem, these clues were left for people to, inspire people to go out in the wilderness and experience nature. And, Forrest talked about, a guy in Texas with 12 kids, throw the bedroll in the back of the pickup truck and go out looking for it. He's not expecting people, to go, climbing over mountain ranges for months at a time. Another comment that Forrest made was that the blaze is something physical that you can look at. He confirmed that. He did say it's not impossible to remove the blaze, but it's not feasible to try, and he's certain that it's still there. So we knew we were looking for something that was potentially big or heavy, or something, not initials on a tree, and not a bell that Forrest made sitting on top of a rock. It just, we wanted to make sure we were looking for something significant, and the Tumlum mine, mineral deposits, or whatever those were coming from the mine that are bright yellow, to us fit the bill, because those mines have been closed for over 100 years, and that yellow discoloration was still extremely bright and colorful. So we knew that that was something that was going to last for a while. So going back to the word that is key, we talked about that being cold. Forrest, in 2015, made a comment that no one, to his uncertain knowledge, had analyzed one important possibility related to the correct solve, and he therefore suggested that searchers consider the what-ifs. To us, that hint, consider the what-ifs, ties into the word that is key, or a word that will help you more than some others. Because, as we stated, or as we talked about, if you go in the summer, what if I go in the summer? What if it's bright and sunny? What if it doesn't rain the one day that I'm out searching? What if I wear waders and I don't get cold feet walking through a creek or a river? If you asked yourself those questions early on, you would probably focus more on the line, your effort will be worth the cold. Another comment that Forrest made was in response to a question about his special spot losing some of that significance once found. And Forrest answered that essentially he's not worried about it. He can go to that place in his mind whenever he wants, and he will always consider it to be mine alone. Those were his words. I will always consider that special spot to be mine alone, or something similar to that. But when we were standing across from the Tumlum mine on Mount Sniffel, looking at that yellow blaze, we were looking at a lone mine building. So for us, mine alone seemed like might be a clue, confirming that we were right at the right spot. When he published the map, on the back of the map, or on the page opposite of the map, he mentioned that when he was working with the company that made the map, they asked him jokingly, why don't you put, would you like to put an X on this map, indicating where the treasure is? And he, jokingly responded, he's not going to do that, but he said, if I'm being honest, it's there in spirit. To us, that was confirmation that a ghost town was part of the correct hint, or at least that no place for the meek had something to do with a lack of spirit. One thing that I think prevented a lot of people from looking at Kirwin was an answer that Forrest gave regarding the vehicle he used when he hid the treasure. Someone had asked him what type of vehicle he used, and he responded, a sedan. I think a lot of people took that on its face to mean a car, as opposed to a truck or a four-wheel drive vehicle. But of course, if you look up sedan, which we know Forrest has said he looks up every word he uses, and he looked up every word in the poem before he published it. You look up the word sedan, and it essentially just means a four-person vehicle with a permanent top. So it doesn't really narrow it down to a car. A Jeep could be considered a sedan in that regard. So I think that did prevent a lot of people from looking out as far as Kirwin, just because the road to get out there requires a high clearance vehicle and four-wheel drive. So last I'll end with a couple of theories that to me kind of stood out. Again, these are just theories. I have no evidence to back these things up, but they were all kind of in support of the Kirwin solve. One of the nearest main town to Kirwin is Cody, Wyoming, and in Cody, which is on just outside the east entrance to Yellowstone National Park, there's a museum there called the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, and Forrest, I believe, was on the board of advisors there, or active participant in that museum's administration for years. He's done interviews where he's been on site there, and he's also donated artwork there. In that museum is a jacket, a brown leather jacket that Amelia Earhart gave to Carl Dunrude in advance of her moving to the summer house there. So she sent it by mail and said, hey, hang on to this for me when I come to move out there to that cabin. I'll need this jacket. Of course, unfortunately, she was lost, and Carl Dunrude donated the jacket to the museum. So to us, that at least gave some connection between Forrest and his active role at the museum. This piece at the museum where Forrest must have seen it at some point and heard the history of how it got there, knowing that, Amelia Earhart had a cabin being built out in Kirwin. Maybe he went out to that area on more than one occasion. It just seemed like, okay, at least we have some tentative connection here between his knowledge of Amelia Earhart and Kirwin. Another theory related to the museum, the Buffalo Bill Center of the West and Kirwin, is that in 1992, Richard King Mellon purchased the land of Kirwin and gave it back to the public, and now it's administered by the Forest Service. Forrest had said there were a handful of things that went right that enabled him to design this chase in the way that he did. To me, if it was in Kirwin, this could have been one of those things that went right. We know that Forrest was diagnosed with cancer in 1988. That's when he came up with the idea to hide the treasure chest and, along with it, lay his bones to rest there. So it seems like that could have been one of those things that went right for him. In 1988, he was diagnosed. 4 years later, the land where he had in mind to hide his chest was purchased, taken away from private hands that could have reopened mine developments at any time, and gave it back to the public so it's protected from any further development. So now he, in 1992, could feel comfortable leaving a chest there, not worried about it being blocked off for any reason. And interesting, I found a 1986 annual report from the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. So this is 2 years before Forrest's diagnosis. In 1986, both Forrest and Paul Mellon, the cousin of Richard King Mellon, donated to this museum in Cody, Wyoming. So is it possible that Forrest knew Paul Mellon, and is it possible that he would have shared his plan with Paul Mellon, and Paul Mellon could have encouraged his cousin Richard King Mellon to purchase the land? I don't know. It's possible. Forrest has always said 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. Paul Mellon's dead. Maybe he told Paul Mellon about his plan. I don't think he would have to worry about Paul Mellon, a billionaire, going out to, ruin Forrest Fenn's legacy by taking, his chest with $1 million in gold in it. Maybe they were of the same mind, and Paul was cool with it and was like, yeah, I'll get my cousin to buy the land and give it back to the people, and then it'll be safe. I don't know, just theory. The other thing that, Forrest mentioned, things went right in 1999. They started reinforcing the buildings in Kirwin, thereby kind of solidifying the ghost town, at least for, several more years. So if that was part of Forrest's initial clue list, no place for the meek would be a ghost town. In 1999, he was probably relieved when they started, fixing these buildings up and reinforcing them. He felt more confident to include that as part of his clues. Maybe he was behind that as well. I don't know. Maybe he was involved. Maybe he went out there. Maybe, hammered a couple nails into the building. I don't know. Anyway, if you guys have watched this far, thank you so much. Again, I know people have spent years and years and lots of money searching for this treasure. I just, add my name to that list. My friends and I went out, gave it our best, and we just feel, lucky that we had the chance to do it before the chest was found. We came away with some great photos, great videos, great stories to tell, and it's definitely encouraged me to get out more and explore. Being from the city, it's quite a trek to get to the Rockies, but definitely worth it. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, found this helpful or entertaining at least, and we'll stay tuned for more information from Forrest and the Finder. All right, take care.